Well, welcome back to the Munn Avenue Muse podcast and videocast brought to you by the munnavenuepress.com, M-U-N-N, avenuepress.com. We publish and promote books as well as produce podcasts like this. And I'm delighted to have today one of my favorite people and favorite authors, Carrie Pierce. So I'll tell you a little bit about her, and then she'll share some of her inspiration and ideas behind writing her great book, Handwritten Notes. So Carrie is a multifaceted entrepreneur, leadership coach, blogger, and author who has composed over 10,000 handwritten notes throughout her career. It's probably way more than that by now, I'm sure.
Well,
She
after knowing you, there's a couple more to add, right?
She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania before entering the real estate industry, where she worked for 20 years in Seattle, Washington, accepting numerous accolades along the way with genuine humility and gratitude to those she worked with. Currently, Carrie serves as a leadership coach at Building Champions, sharing her wealth of experience and knowledge with others. Residing in Chalfont, Pennsylvania, she is a proud mother of 3 daughters and the guardian of her psychotic cat, Phoebe. When she's not immersed in reading or writing, Carrie can be found seeking solace from her children with a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Yeah. So welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm delighted to have you here. And I'm always interested in people's background and experience because somehow, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it lands up in their books because we're all conditioned by our experiences. So tell us a little bit about the real estate world and how you came upon understanding the value of thank you notes.
Yeah, I grew up blue collar parents, and I think that's important because when you grow up with blue collar parents, you have a certain appreciation for things. Every penny counts in the household, and they have this great sense of gratitude, towards others. And I was always brought up in a way where you help your neighbor. You try to do your best, and you do well in school, and you'll do great things. And so, it's kind of the American dream, sort of, blue collar parents. We want our kids to move on from this life that we have now and do better. And so, I took that to heart. And when I was in college, I actually met somebody who was a real estate investor, and his story was fascinating because he was homeless at a certain point in Philadelphia, and he scraped up enough money to put down on his first rental property, and he used that to remortgage and buy another. And pretty soon he owned tons and tons of property, and he now speaks all over the nation for Narcotics Anonymous, I think it's called. Anyhow, so he just has an incredible story, and he kind of guided and showed me how to do that myself. And this was all while I was in college. And when I graduated, I sort of took his teachings, which were pretty much, it's not the amount of money that you earn that will create wealth. It's what you do with your income that creates your wealth. And so I saved up just like he did, and I eventually bought my first property, and I remortgaged that, and I bought a bunch more. And pretty soon, over time, I had bought and managed over 15 units of rental property. And all along the way, I collected my real estate license, and I started practicing real estate. And it just became my love. I just really took to it, and I loved it. But all along the way, what I realized that was the most meaningful part of the job is that treating others the way that I grew up and learned to treat other people. That was a way to create a lot of clientele from the business. Like I actually grew a lot of my client base from this philosophy that you treat others with a great level of importance. Every penny counts. You do right, you have integrity. Well, you can still be successful in real estate if you operate that way. And one of the things I always made sure I did was write notes to my clients. I observed what was great about them and I told them in a note. And after the sale, I thanked them and told them what a great job they did. And I did it in a note. And I wrote notes to the title companies, to the mortgage companies, to the other realtor I was working with. And it just really set this great sense of gratitude around me. And I think people enjoyed working with me more because of this sense of gratitude I had. And because I always treated other people like they mattered, like they were important. So I kind of went off on a tangent there, Charlie, but
No, that's all right.
you might have to edit some of that out. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of one or more of your thank you notes, and it's fun. A really good thank you note. People keep them. I have your thank you note right next to me here for helping you publish your, or not publish, but promote your book. And um, maybe you could talk a little bit about what creates a great thank you note, because I think what I see, like in the example of the one you sent to me, is saying something specific. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And so the book it's a little bit about thank you notes, but it's also about making others feel important and like they matter and doing it in a way that's sincere. And so the thank you notes are this nice way to sit down and be able to really think about somebody else for a long time, not just a quick text, like really give a lot of thought to somebody else. And it's something that we've been missing in this world for so long. I mean, with text messaging and everything happening so fast and information overload, we're so distracted and we have a hard time focusing. And there's also with social media and just the way things are right now, it's this hyper me focus where the selfies and I need to appear a certain way on Facebook and social media. And it seems very faux to me at times. And so I think when you sit down and you do this ritual where you're really just genuinely giving your thoughts to somebody else for 5 minutes, even, hopefully 10 or more, you get outside of your head and you're able to lift somebody else up and you go to bed that night feeling great that you made somebody else feel special. And it helps you shed some of this me focus where you're constantly trying to prove to other people that you're such and such. Well, maybe it's not so much about you. Maybe it's a lot about other people. And so I just love this ritual. I think kids these days need it more than ever. Especially when they think a proper thank you is done through a text. And certainly there are certain times where that's fine, but it's really just a sense of gratitude and living with grace. And anyway, so I believed it enough that I wrote the book, and just hoping that others will read it and kind of adopt this ritual and see what it can do for you.
Yeah, and I'll mention now, but that Handwritten Notes is available on Amazon.com by Carrie Pierce, if you want to check it out. But there's something about the act of writing by hand that's different than typing or texting, right? I mean, I
Hmm.
think it connects with your brain in a different way when you write by hand. You and I have talked about this before,
Yeah.
but um, like I'm a big note taker, right? I have a Kindle Scribe here and I take notes on everything. And there's studies that show that handwriting also lets you retain information better
Hmm.
than texting. And a lot of great authors will handwrite their books and then just transcribe them later because even
Yeah.
being creative, like you're talking about thinking about the other person. Well, typing, especially if you can touch type, is, you speed along. When you handwrite, you have to sort of think a little while you're writing too. Haven't you found that to be the case?
Oh, absolutely. I talk about it in the book. There's studies that have been done that show that when you write something by hand, it imprints on your memory much stronger than typing. Um, so
And
yeah, it's
they're even
absolutely.
teaching. I read the other day, which I thought was really interesting, that the California school system is reinstituting teaching penmanship
Hmm.
again. It's sort of disappeared. Like my
Yeah,
mother had the most amazing penmanship. It was the Palmer method,
yeah,
and people used to write beautifully. I mean, my handwriting is pretty cruddy, but
yeah.
um, yeah. How about people who feel like, their handwriting is lousy, so they're not going to write handwritten notes? What do you have to say to those people?
Yeah, so that comes up a lot. Um, there's really no easy way out of this one. If everybody tries, if you try hard enough, you can write a legible card. And I've had people who have disabilities and there's certain, people that their hands shake. And that's true. There's legitimacy to some people really, they can't write something legibly. And that's okay. And I had one person. This was so fascinating. I love this. Somebody who read my book had sent me a card. And in the card, it was shaky, but they said they had a disability. And they said they were inspired by the book. So what they did was they cut out word descriptions of what they thought of the book. And they dropped maybe 10 little pieces of paper in there with the typed out words. And it was just creative and it was beautiful. And the point is that it should slow your mind down enough that you're really immersing in real thought and sincere thought. When you're typing on a computer, it's just too fast. Your brain can't keep up with how
Right,
fast you're typing.
right,
When you slow down, regardless of how good handwriting you have, just your mind has enough time to process what you're writing.
right, right. Oh, that's so true. And an alternative too. Um, my brother-in-law used to be a newspaper journalist, still types on an old-fashioned typewriter.
I love
So
that.
we'll get notes from him on an old-fashioned typewriter, and
I
that has
love
sort
that.
of a similar kind of effect because you're manually doing it in a way. You're fashioning it, and because I love that so much, I recently bought an old-fashioned typewriter for
Did
that
you?
purpose. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
you get a similar kind of, yeah, handcrafted feel out of an old typewriter, don't you think?
You do. And you're also more careful. You
Right,
can't,
because if you make a mistake, then you got to do it over.
yes,
Although there is such a thing as whiteout, but it's
yes.
still
I mean, there's something to be said about getting back to this purposeful, the way you act. You know,
right,
when you can type any word on Google and type it and spell it as wrong as you want, and it still knows what you want. And
right,
it's fascinating and great, but also there's another side to that where you just get lazy and complacent and fleeting, and you don't really give a lot of focus and thought to what you're doing in the moment. And it's the difference between typing with the typewriter and typing with the computer. It's like, sure, there's computers hands down. There's nothing better than a computer. Of course, a typewriter is not better than a computer. But let's not move so fast through time that we're not appreciating what's great about the old times.
yeah. So thinking about that, I mean, you have daughters. How do you transfer this passion or teach them what you're telling us now?
They all know they have to write thank you notes. I'm big on thank you notes. and they have to write something sincere about the other person that they appreciate, or something sincere about the gift that they appreciate. And let's just say you received just this gift, you just don't want it, it was terrible, it was awful. The kids have had these gifts that they feel that way about, and it's a great out learning moment for them, like, hey, you know what, somebody went out, took the thought to buy you that, and they thought about you. And it doesn't matter if you don't like it. You can always find something very nice to say in a thank you note. Hey, that was really thoughtful. I'm just grateful to know you and know somebody who thinks of me enough to go out and do this for me.
Yeah,
And the
great.
gratitude learning factor, um, plus making somebody else feel like they matter, um, to the point I do it to the point where they kind of like don't even want the presents because they have so many, they just get so many, and they know they have to write the cards. They're like, oh man.
Yeah.
um
Well, and probably one of the best things you do as a mother is you teach by example. I mean, it's very clear what
yeah.
you do. And they may, those of you who have teenagers out there or young teens or whatever, they go through a period where they're going to repel against anything their parents want them to do. But it's funny how, I mean, because I have now a 33-year-old and a 44-year-old, how they'll come around to
Mhm.
some of those things you taught them when they were younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, yeah, the other thing that makes you different than the guest we've had on before is that, we had a wonderful interview with Catherine Ellison, who's Pulitzer Prize winner and written many books, and Jim Kliger, who's a psychoanalyst and wrote several books and is now writing fiction. But you are not an author by trade like they are,
Mm-mm.
but you had this desire to write a book because you really believed in this and you made it happen. And I think that's a great example for other people out there because I talk to so many people, especially when I do a live event for my books, um, who say, "Oh, I've been meaning to write a book or I have this idea for a book." But what's it take to get from that to actually executing your vision? What advice would you give those people who've
Yeah.
never written a book before and have an idea and maybe an inclination to do it, to,
Yeah.
to actually do it?
Yeah, everybody's different, but I know that what worked really well for me was taking off all the pressure and just sitting down and writing all of my thoughts out, regardless of how cohesive it sounded at first. And so, um, I just started journaling really, and then I'd go back the next day and piece it together, and it would get a little bigger. But really, just something that the piece of advice that you gave me stands true is that every day, just write something. Every day, make it a habit to write something. And I think I heard that advice after I had written the book, and that's almost what I did. And I know when you told me that, I know that if I had gone back and stopped for a month, I wouldn't have finished it. So I just kind of forced myself every day. I wanted all my thoughts out. And then I took another probably month or two to piece it together and start just going through and perfecting it and going through and going through. Um, and so at a certain point, you have to cut yourself off because the inner perfectionist in you will go through. I mean, I could go through the book now, it's published, and I could find cringe things that I would cringe at and want to change. And so as an author, you have to give yourself an endpoint and let yourself just let go of the book and say, this is it. Otherwise, you'll never publish it.
Right, right. And it's interesting because we work with a lot of different authors, and many of them have problems saying done. Um,
Yes, it's hard. I
and
mean,
it,
it's very hard.
and so I tell them this story, which sort of helps us get over the finish line, which is um, I was listening some years ago. I'm driving on a Sunday, and I'm listening to a football game on the radio, the New York Giants against somebody else. But at the time, John Madden, who was a famous coach and narrator, is narrating, and the game is a blowout. So, like, what are they going to do? A commentator when the game is essentially boring. So,
Mhm.
in the middle of this, John Madden says, I wonder who invented cottage cheese. Okay. And then there's a pause. And then he says, I wonder how he knew he was done. And so, in a way,
Huh.
writing a book is like cottage cheese, and it's not very clear when it's done. For me, and I mentioned this in a prior episode, and this is true of most authors, you'll end up going through your book 15 to 20 times between rewriting and editing and getting feedback from your editor and your proofreader and going through it again. For me, it's the point at which I can't stand looking at it anymore.
Hmm.
And you're
Yeah.
right. It's never going to be 100% absolutely perfect, perfect, perfect. But then you got to let it go. The baby's got to be born,
Trust
it's,
yourself. Yeah.
yeah.
Have faith in yourself.
And
Yep.
it's scary because you don't know what people are going to say. And, on Amazon, I've gotten hundreds of good reviews of my books on Amazon, but occasionally I'll get a 1-star review. And, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, really?
Yeah. And some of those negative reviews are just, those are just people looking to be, there's a certain percentage of the population, they're just looking for negativity. And it's probably not your book. There's part of those negative reviews that every product and every company gets that are just angry people. And so you have to understand sometimes it's more about them than your book.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. And as long as like, uh, well, our authors ask, I feel like if your 4 stars or better on your book, most readers are going to appreciate that. And
yeah.
your book, my books
And have a lot of
are,
reviews. Your books have a ton of reviews. And
yeah.
and that's legitimacy. And so I wish that my book was at your level. But I think that there's a breakthrough number of reviews that you have where people start to think in their minds this is legitimate. And it's not 10. You need to keep working at it and keep trying. It's more than
Well,
that.
yeah. Well, yeah. And also when you get past 50, that's a milestone for Amazon's algorithms. So they show your book more. And if you get past 100, that's another milestone for their
See, I
algorithms.
didn't
So
know
they
that.
show your book a little more.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. Amazon, it's interesting because most people think of Amazon as an online store that happens to sell books and other things, really. But it's really more like Google that happens to sell books and other things. And then it's a search engine. And that box at the top
Yeah.
is where all the action is. So if people are searching on, in my case, psychological thrillers
Hmm.
or metaphysical thrillers, how does Amazon determine what books are going to come up top?
Yeah.
Or in your case, if they search on, they might even search on how to write a good thank you note.
Hmm.
How does your book come up? And Amazon's algorithms have multiple factors, just like Google. One is the book selling? If the book's selling, Amazon wants to sell more books, so they say, "Hey, the book's appealing. We're going to show it more." So
Yeah.
bestsellers tend to show up there. If and when we worked together, your book was a bestseller, right?
Yeah.
So
And I was just going to say, Charlie, there are so many occasions where if I didn't check in with you first, I would have gone deeply astray with my book. And so I know that you weren't looking for a plug, but I have to put a plug in for you because that number one best-selling author status that you got my book was the single best thing that ever happened to my book. And, but not only that, your guidance, I could tell from the very beginning, like it was not only good advice, but you just look out for people's best interests. Like I could tell that about you right from the start. And I knew that you were going to guide me with all those little things, including and the big and the little details that mattered, that would just give me as much help as I possibly could getting my book to sell. It was awesome. Um, but yes, I mean when I wanted to maybe do a new edition, do you remember when I called and talked to you about doing a new edition? And that just that was like my mind was blown in a totally different direction. And if I hadn't consulted with you first, I would have spent a lot of wasted time. So I know you weren't looking for this, but anyone that's out there that was thinking of talking to a publisher, I just can't recommend you enough. I really
Well,
can't.
thank you. Thank you so much. Sure, it's greatly appreciated, and it's easy because I love working with you. Yeah, you're one of my favorite people, and I think people can even tell watching you or listening to you now that you're so sincere and you convey that you care in a way that not many people do. I mean, you're like an empath. Plus, you're an amazing listener. So, um, um, I feel honored and privileged to have met you and had the chance to work with you and
Oh, thanks.
call you a friend. Well, great. So, what are you working on next? I know you've got some other projects in the works. Maybe you can share that with us.
Yeah. Well, I've had a children's book written. It needs to go through the car wash, and I need to bring it to you to get like a good cover. And just it's a children's version of the Handwritten Notes book. And once I get that out, I'm hoping to do another one that's strictly business related. And so, at a certain point, we talked about the second edition, but the book, it's not, it's about handwritten notes, but there's so many business principles and sales principles in that book, which is why I wanted to rename it and do a second edition. It's really it's all based on this core principle that um, people will engage with you in direct proportion to how much you make them feel like they matter. And the kids' book, same principle. When you do the business book, same principle. And you gave me the idea to do some more line books like love letters, handwritten notes, love letters. And so I'm collecting all different sort of love letters and thank you notes, just strictly on thank you notes, just those line books. But I should follow the advice that I had given everybody a couple of minutes ago and that you gave me, which is write a little something every day, which I have not been doing. So
Yeah, well, you'll get there. I mean, so you've become really kind of an expert on thank you notes. I know you were invited to speak at some national convention, I think for real estate, and
yep.
you had a partnership with a major national retail chain. It sold
Yeah. Yeah.
sold thank you cards and stationery and things
Yeah.
like that.
It was a real estate company. So I think they liked the fact that I was putting forth this way to be successful in sales that was not salesy at all. You were just by being a good person with integrity, uh, you could make a lot of money without even having that be your main goal. Your main goal is to lift other people up and do well by other people. Well, the real estate companies, their biggest issue with their agents is their agents doing bad things and getting the brokerage in trouble. And so here's this book showing like, hey, you can still be successful and not get me in trouble as a broker. And so there's some sales made there. And I think that's a benefit to any brokerage if they're, looking for a success book.
Well, cool. So, what do you what do you read now? What authors, what books are on your nightstand?
Well, one of my favorite books uh, is called The Boy, the Horse, the Fox, and the Mole. And it's by, let's see, Charlie Mackesy. And it's just this beautiful book that appeals to whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old. It is a beautiful book. And you had mentioned I work at Building Champions as a leadership coach. One of our coaches in the company actually does all day leadership seminars based on this book. There's so much beauty to it, and there's leadership principles, and there's even a mini, I think, movie on it now. But it's just a quick read, and if you need a pick me up or just a nice book to read to inspire you, it's just wonderful.
No, great. That's great. Well, this has been so delightful speaking with you, and I hope that the listeners out there who want to stand out or do something different or lift up other people's day will pick up a copy of Handwritten Notes by Carrie Pierce on Amazon.com. And please subscribe, like this episode, or share it with friends. The Munn Avenue Muse, if you look it up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can get it there. And it'll also, the Munn Avenue Muse is a channel on YouTube now. And then, of course, if you would like some help publishing your book, designing the covers, promoting your book, or even doing a podcast like this, go to Munn, M-U-N-N, avenuepress.com. So thank you again, Carrie, and I'll look forward to getting together with you again sometime soon.
Yes, thanks for having me.